to take the easiest question first. And the first question is, can we find a list of the amendments, the 61 amendments? And the answer is yes. Just type into your Google search bar, Montana legislative bills, and then it will give you a long drop-down list, and you can find constitutional amendments on that list. Click on that, and it'll give you all 61 of them. Some of them are not drafted yet, but I think the ones that people are serious about have been drafted. But it'll give you the list, and it'll give you the text of the individual bills. So, I guess I'm done. Is there currently legislation being considered that would, if enacted, make it considerably more difficult for citizens of Montana to amend our Constitution? I am not aware of any such proposal, and the main aunt is not either. And we keep a pretty close eye on those things as events unfold. So I'm not aware of that being made any more difficult. The next question is, America's political and societal pendulum is always in motion. We've survived civil war, external threats during World War I and II, and internal division during the 60s. In this era, how can the pragmatic center be better heard and better utilize its place in our society? By speaking up and by letting your thoughts be known to friends, neighbors, recognizing that that's not always easy. And of course, you don't want to take advantage of a given situation and make yourself obnoxious and rejected as a result of how persistent you might become. But the fact of the matter is that, I grew up in a family that I wasn't always certain was either Republican or Democrat, which some people have said is a blind spot of mine. And as a consequence, maybe sometimes I don't get it right in the beginning. And I was also a prosecutor for a long period of time. And my job was to take the facts as they were and to determine whether or not a violation of the law had been before a court or the police and had been referred to me, and not to make a decision until such time as I had all the information that was needed and necessary to make a fair and thoughtful decision about whether or not a person should be charged. And just the charging of another human being all by itself is a significant imposition upon that individual, because they may not have a record of conviction, but they have a record of arrest. And so it's something that you do with all due deliberation and very, very serious consideration. So I got used to, I started in the Army and overseas, and I got used to following that fundamental system of analysis. Determine the facts, figure out what's true, figure out if there's a violation of the law, is it something that can be established beyond a reasonable doubt, and then, only then, should it be filed. And there were other ethical considerations as well that still are required to be observed, that said you don't discuss it in the public before the decision is made. And as a prosecutor, it's something that you should avoid any public comment about at all until such time as a fair and impartial panel of jurors has been impaneled and has been given the case. So that was the world that I was used to. And then add on top of that, layer over the top of that, the fact that I think my mother was a Republican, and I'm pretty damn certain that my father was a strong Democrat. And I'm their son. What can you expect? But I never had occasion to really get engaged in partisan politics all the time that I was a prosecutor. I ran for judicial office, and because I thought I could offer service that was fair and thoughtful and careful. But the people of Montana didn't agree with me. So I ran in 1980, I got beat fairly handily. And then I thought, well, I still think that I could be of some service as a judge. So I ran for a district judgeship, ran for the Supreme Court the first time at 32 years old, thinking, you know, I needed to get after this. I didn't have much time left. And so I lost again, but this time only by 300 votes. So I thought, well, this is something that's more hopeful than it was the last time. So, 2 years later, a new judgeship was created, and I thought, well, I was very close the last time, and as a consequence, I want to try again. So I ran a third time, and I lost again. And when I would look back at these things, I don't know how many of you have been involved with the campaign, but it's a very rigorous, arduous, difficult journey. Because you're offering yourself to your friends and neighbors who know you, wanting to be of service in their lives, and at the end of the day, no matter what you've said or offered to them, it didn't quite pass the test of acceptability, and they didn't decide on you. So, it hurts. But I have to tell you that I learned way, way more learning or losing than I ever did winning. About myself, about what my friends and neighbors expected of me, what it was that they thought I needed to do to improve. All of those things that you go through in a self-examination. After 18 months of walking the streets and handing out literature and going to all the clubs that used to be in existence, which is a topic we can talk about it forever. And so at the end of the day, it kind of grooms you in a way that makes you realize, look, other people have different thoughts. Theirs are entitled to as much consideration as yours. And at the end of the day, the verdict is yours. You took on this gamble, this risk, voluntarily. You need to accept the results. And inevitably, I thought they were right when I would get some distance away from when the decision was made. I could see why they had made the decision they made. So this is how I approach all these issues and all these problems. And, you know, when it came time for candidates, even though I was at the RNC and I advocated for partisan political candidates, I expected a level of behavior and rules of conduct that reflected the nobility and the highest expectations of the people that I served. And if I could not look them in the eye and explain a decision, other than being what I wanted and what only I thought was right, then I didn't deserve to be considered to serve in public office. So I left the judicial race process, and about 4 years later, I was recruited, actually, to run for a partisan office for the first time. Now, I voted in every election. I was a good citizen. To be honest with you, as long as you don't tell anybody, I never voted a straight ticket because I wanted to vote for the person that I had confidence in. And that's pretty much was acceptable behavior, even though you don't post it on a lamppost. But I went to my dad, who was dying of cancer, the good old Sanders County Blue Hawk that he was. And I said, I'm going to run one more time. And he was sick, but he was not missing his sense of humor. And he said, why in the name of God would you do that? You've run 3 times, you've lost 3 times. Don't you think that's about it? And he was really involved in all of these campaigns. And I said, well, that's only half the story. The other half is that I'm going to run as a Republican. Now, he wasn't an overly spiritual man, but he called on the Lord and prayed. And he said, why? And I said, because I've studied the platforms. And I feel a little more comfort here than over here. And he said, nobody reads the platforms. You just need to do what your father did before you. So that's the approach that when I take a look at all of these things, the way I feel is that I'm not going to get everything I want every day. I don't any place. Not in my marriage, not with my kids, not any place. and nobody does. And if we get so strident and unreasonable and don't recognize the dignity and the majesty of the ideas of other people, then we're missing half of the possibilities for resolution. And that this ought to be a marketplace within which ideas are advanced and the best are distilled to ultimately serve the people that we jointly live with. And in addition to that, the fact is that this ought to be about the power of ideas, not about raw power. And at the end of the day, I think we're making some mistakes with our both political parties with how it is that we proceed to solve problems. And I would rather have an 80% solution than nothing. Because at the end of the day, it's about advancing the ball down the road to make certain that you get something done for the people that you live with. And you cannot do that exclusively by yourselves. Now, why do I go through this long preface? I want to give a couple of laughs, I'll confess. But we now have political parties who will not compromise unless they get everything that they want. And as a consequence of that, they become absolutist, almost autocratic in their approach. And they do not serve people well at proceeding in that fashion. At the end of the day, there's a lot of anger, there's edgy feelings, there's bitterness, there's a failure to communicate honestly and openly. And that's what part of the problem is presently. We do not discipline ourselves enough in these discussions in a way that can save the ability for us to ultimately deliberate about different issues. So here's a good example. You know, the Constitution is divided into three branches, as you know, invented by a French political scientist whose name was Montesquieu. And he was writing about this in the 17th and 18th century. And he dissected every form of government that had ever been known to humankind before and came up with their positive strengths and what was possible and what was not. And with democracy, he said, it is based entirely on virtue. You must choose virtue. You must love your Constitution. And if you do not love your Constitution and you do not choose virtue, which is kind of a metaphysical dynamic when you think about it, but we're doing it here today. What we're doing is practicing virtue. And they're simple. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what they are. Being patient, exchanging greetings, not screaming and yelling, not calling somebody stupid for the thoughts that they have, not insisting that it's our way every day, all day. So what's happening to us is we have forgotten how to treat each other. And I know that may sound almost divine. Maybe it is. But I'm telling you that a constitution and a democracy, or a democratic republic, or a republican democracy, cannot exist unless people choose it as a result of what's in their hearts every single day. And that is what is missing from our system today. And it's getting translated through all of these various forms of media that are instantaneous, ubiquitous, overpowering, superfluous, and swamp us. We go to places where on the internet we might feel comfortable. There's algorithms there that comfort us in all of our anxiety, giving us stuff that we know, that they know we want to hear. And at the end of the day, our democracy is suffering gravely as a result of it. One example, and now I'll be quiet, sit down. The Constitution says that these three branches of government are absolutely essential because the framers understood human nature very, very well. And they knew they had to have checks and balances because otherwise one would take advantage of another. And if one got out of sync or exceeded too far the boundaries of its jurisdiction, that the entire edifice was going to come apart. The adhesive that was holding us together would loosen, grow brittle, and fall out, and the nation would collapse. Here's a good example. There are scores of bills. Now, there's only 61 constitutional amendments, 9 of which deal with the judiciary. But there are a number of them that deal with redistricting and with elections. And there are there's others that deal with the Board of Regents. And the Board of Regents, as all of you probably know, was created in order to preserve academic freedom and to create a different system that was directly answerable to the people, but nonetheless was separate and apart in some respects from the legislature. Well, last year, there was a big debate about whether or not concealed weapons could be carried on campuses in Montana in 2021. And ultimately, the Board of Regents, which had exclusive authority at the time, was called upon to make a decision. They made the decision, no, you can have weapons on campus, but they have to be checked into armories. And we have, I don't know if you know this, but we have armories on every campus in Montana, where you can check your weapons into the armory. You can get them out anytime you want. But obviously, people typically do it when they're going hunting. But anyway, so the regents said no, and ultimately that case was taken to court. And ultimately, the court said, this is the exclusive jurisdiction of the regents. Their decision stands. So what's the response to that? Not an acceptance. And we're just talking concealed weapons here now, that you can wear concealed on campuses. The response is a bill to change a constitutional amendment, to change the Constitution in a way that says that the Board of Regents has to answer to every other demand or legislative demand or governmental regulation that is imposed by the legislature. So what do you think that's about? It's about concealed weapons on campus. Now, my point of view is that is not in keeping with the oath that you either swore or that you abide by to faithfully serve the people you live with and to support and protect and defend the Constitution, because you're finding a way to impose upon the people of this state a means that was previously prohibited, and I don't think that reflects the kind of care and safety of the Constitution that ought to be undertaken. So those kinds of solutions are what are the problem. It's my way or the highway, and that's the problem when you get too much authority vested in one place. And that's why these people who continue to push these extremes think that they can sculpt a permanent state of affairs forever. My lifetime, your lifetime, the lifetimes of all of those who will follow hereafter, if they change these institutions fundamentally. And that's the issue that we're confronting. And it's serious. It is very serious. Because once we get to the point where we don't trust each other, and we don't trust our institutions, and we don't love our Constitution, we are on the verge of falling apart. So that's what the debate is all about in plain terms, lengthy terms, plain terms.